Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Brian E. Roach.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Brian Roach, the host who doesn't like toast, and I want to remind you that we are presented by Gameday Tailgate Experience. Elevate your tailgate when the Steelers travel to Jacksonville November 18th to take on those Jacksonville Jaguars. We've got a special edition of the podcast for you today to help get you through the bye week and alleviate the time without Steelers football. And to do that, we've got a special guest, a former Steeler, a current Steeler broadcaster, and an all-around great guy, Tunch Ilkin. Tunch, welcome to the show.
Brian, thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
You know, Tunch, you just released a book called In the Locker Room.
Right.
Which, as I was telling you before we started, I was reading and I finished yesterday, and wanted to talk to you about it, and I realized after I had gone through it, because it is just absolutely so chock full of great stories, insights into a variety of different things from a player's standpoint, that I realized I had folded over way too many pages to talk about in the time that we will have. And it's, you know, I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you is what inspired you to finally do this, to write something and to put pen to paper, so to speak, and put these things down?
Well, you know, Brian, Triumph Publishing had been after me to write a book for a few years now, and I just wasn't really comfortable. You know, I'm not a writer, Brian. I don't write well. Whenever I look at stuff that I've written, I kind of look at it and go, "Oh gosh, you know, that looks so juvenile." And Triumph kept saying, "Well, we'll get a co-writer and who's good at it." And I kept just saying no. But then one of the members of Triumph Publishing called me up and said, "Hey, listen, would you do it if Scott Brown co-write it?" And Scott's a good buddy of mine, and you know, I trust him. I trust him completely, and so I said yes. And so, you know, I think the reason I wanted to write it is because we live in an era right now that is vilifying football. And I love the game. And I think one of the great things about the game are the relationships. And, you know, in the 14 years I had in the NFL, 13 years with the Steelers, I had some very rich friendships. And I had great relationships with my coaches, from Chuck to offensive line coach Raleigh Dodge to Jack Henry, who also coached offensive line. And you know, and I wanted people to witness those relationships and see how special the NFL is. And so, you know, you know, Scotty and I got together and we started talking, and he'd ask me questions, and then I'd tell him story after story after story that really kind of epitomized what it was all about. And you know, one of the reasons I really said, yeah, I want to write this book is last year on Thursday night before the Tennessee Titan game, I got back together with two very close buddies of mine, Keith Willis and Mike Mularkey. Mike Mularkey and I roomed together after Craig Wolfley went to the Minnesota Vikings, and Mularkey and I are good buddies, and Keith Willis and I used to practice against each other every day, and we'd fight, but we were really close friends. You know, it's funny, we'd fight on Wednesday, and we'd do Bible study together on Friday morning. And so I just wanted people to get some insight to the richness of the relationships.
Yeah, and it definitely comes across in the book. It's one of the real, I guess, emphases in the book. You know, so you got the chance, and you describe a lot of this in the book, you got the chance to play with a lot of really legendary Steelers players back from the 70s. guys like Lambert and Green and Swan and Stallworth and Bradshaw. And, of course, the O-line guys like Mike Webster and John Kolb and Larry Brown. And you talk about that in the book, and you tell some interesting stories about those guys. And while I don't want to give away too much from the book, just give, I guess your impressions on some of these guys like Joe Green, for example.
Yeah, Joe was, the funny thing was, and I think I tell the story in the book, when I was first going against Joe Green as a rookie, I remember I was holding him because I couldn't block him. He was that good, and I was just, very young and small but slow and raw. And, and I'd be blocking him. And one time I was blocking him, he said, "Rook, quit holding me." And I said, and I remember walking back to the hall thinking to myself, well, how am I going to block him if I can't hold him? And so I held him again on the next play, and he bolo punched me right in the belly button. It felt like my belly button hit my spine. And I remember I had no air in my legs. I was going, And I walked back to the huddle, and I remember saying to Wolf, I go, "Good coaching tip, don't hold Joe." And the funny thing was that throughout the course of the year, I practiced against Joe Green every day. And there was a point in the season, probably towards the end of my rookie year, when Joe said, "You're getting better, buddy." And I remember thinking to myself, I couldn't wait to get home. I called my dad, and I said, "Dad, Joe Green said I'm getting better." It was like it was one of the greatest affirmations that I've ever had. And one of the other things that Joe did for me, kind of in a mentoring style, he told me how to use my hands better than I was using them. Tunch, instead of leaving your hands out there, pop them and recoil, pop them and recoil. And we did an event together where we both speak, and he said, "See, I invented the Tunch punch," and I said, "Yeah, you kind of did." And so Joe was and practicing against those guys, really, in the book of Proverbs it says 27:17, "As iron sharpens iron, so shall one man sharpen another." Practicing against Joe and LC and Lambert and Dwight White, and Gary Dunn and, Banaszak and on, and I could just list them all. That does sharpen you. And I remember thinking to myself at one point in my career, because of the intense practices we had, games were not as difficult as I thought. Sometimes I make light of it and say games were easier than practice. That's not really true. But there was an element of that because every day when you go against Hall of Famers and Pro Bowlers, it tests your mettle. It challenges your manhood.
Yeah, and you talk about that, especially in the concept of, you talked about your offensive line coach liked to see fire and spark and kind of was encouraged if you showed that through fighting in sometimes and it challenges you. And so, you talk about the Turkish temper in the book and how you had to come to terms with that. But early on, that was a part of showing, I guess, that you belonged maybe a little bit.
Yeah. Well, Brian, I've always, my buddy Leo Wisniewski always says that I played with the immigrant chip on my shoulder. That and there's some truth to that because I never felt like I belonged. I was from a small school, and in our culture, in the Turkish culture, it's a very, honor, shame culture. And, and it's very combative by nature. My dad was a yeller and he was a fighter and he was a tough guy. And I wanted to be like my dad. My uncles were like that. And so, there was a part of that, when I came into the NFL, I felt like I had to fight to show that I belonged, and I also knew that our offensive line coach, Raleigh Dodge, my first offensive line coach, he liked it. He said, "Don't take any, garbage from anybody." And I remember probably my first fight was with Tom Beasley when he jumped offside and jacked me. and then I went off on him, and we got in a fight. And the funny thing is we're really good friends, and then Dirt Winston and I got in a fight, and and I just wanted to make sure, I did have a temper, and I did, and it did feed the football experience in our day. Fed that, and the anger fed the football fed the anger. It was kind of an interesting cycle of kind of the way I always felt like I had to show that I belonged. Probably great insecurity.
So another thing that, and we hear these kinds of stories, I guess, from ex-players and throughout, is that when you played, especially in camp, it was a much different experience than it is today for today's players. You had 2-a-day practices, you went pads a lot, it was full speed type of stuff, and it's much more mandated by the CBA now what they can and can't do. But kind of, if you can, give the listeners an idea of what really does that mean? What is the difference in what you used to have to go through? Because I know in the book you talk about how much you just really hated camp.
Oh, Brian, camp was so intense. Chuck made it intense. And every day was a challenge to your manhood. Every day, you never wanted to lose a one-on-one. You never wanted to lose in practice. And so, you had, you'd wait. We'd come into camp on a Thursday, and we'd do the run test, which was sometimes 5.350. Sometimes it was, a 20-minute run, and sometimes it was 1000s, 886. Regardless, we had the run test. And then Friday morning, we had Oklahoma drill with everybody watching. The media was there, the cameras were there, and it was, to quote my buddy Wolf, it was very gladiatorial. And it was so intense. And then in the afternoon, so you got through 2 hours in the morning practice from like 9:30 to 11:30, and sometimes he'd keep you later, so you knew that your lunchtime and nap time in between two practices was shrinking. And then, you'd go to lunch, you'd come back, you'd sleep for an hour, and you'd wake up groggy, and you have to go back out there and 2 to 2.5 hours more of practice and physical one-on-one pass rush. And every one-on-one was intense. And our offensive line coach, Raleigh Dodge, and George Perlis, they would be going, "How do you like that?" And they'd be so competitive. Raleigh, if I'd have a good one-on-one and stuff someone, he goes, "He stuffed them like a pimento olive, Georgie." and then a defensive line would beat you, and then George Perlis would go, "How do you like that, Rollo?" And it was so competitive, and the practices were so hard, and so you went through, anywhere from 4 to 5 hours of practices a day, all right? And then you'd go to the meeting from 7 to 10 o'clock, and you would lay in your bed at the end of the day, and you wouldn't want to go to sleep because as soon as you closed your eyes, it would start all over again. And the first 12 or the first 15 practices were something like 2 weeks and 3 days of just 2 days. And you would just sit there and go, "Oh my," and the best time of the day, the absolutely best time of the day was when that second practice ended. And you had that, that brief hour between the end of practice to eat dinner. Maybe you went to, we used to go to this place called either the 19th hole or the intermission. As Chuck would say, to replenish our fluids,
mm-hmm.
and it would help you enjoy the food more in the cafeteria. And the way they have the food now, Brian, it's phenomenal.
Oh, wow.
It's catered and it's wonderful. In our day, it was cafeteria food, So you know what I mean? And then after, and we'd always go to Wendy's. I remember, there weren't in the 80s, early 80s, there weren't a lot of places to go to eat. We used to, a lot of times if we got out of our meeting early enough, we'd drive up to Bull's Tavern in Ligonier because I knew Bull, and he was a great guy, and he would make us this big platter of frog legs and hot dogs and hamburgers. And it was a great place to go because, there weren't a lot of people there. It was kind of like a mountain bar, and they had great food, and you could throw darts and shoot pool and play Pac-Man and Space Invaders. Now I'm really dating myself. And just that respite of a few hours before you had to start it all again, because you'd wake up in the morning with this dread because you're going to have to get after it. And you could never loaf in practice because you'd get beat and you'd get embarrassed. So you always were giving your best.
Yeah. Now, in contrast, because obviously the practices that they have today are not at that kind of intensity to a certain extent, and they limit the amount of contact they can have in tackling drills and whatnot. But are there players on the Steelers team now that you look at those guys and you think, yeah, they could have done this stuff. They would have thrived in that environment?
Well, I think everybody, Brian, could thrive in that environment because I think when you go through that, you have no choice. You don't know better.
True.
You know what I mean? It's not like I had anything to compare it to. Camp was always hard, and at Indiana State it was hard as well. It got harder in the NFL because the players were better. And so, yeah, I think, like David DeCastro, Pounce, those guys could do it. They could do it. So when you don't have anything to compare it to, David DeCastro always asks me and Wolf about the old days, and we tell him stories because, man, you guys were tough, and we made very little money as well. When I tell them I made my first year, I made $25,000. It's like they go, "Really? Are you lying?" But the cost of living, I go, well, the cost of living wasn't that much different. It wasn't relative. But I don't mean that complaining because I had a wonderful experience, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. And the $25,000 was more than I ever made in my life.
Right.
More than I could ever imagine. And I thought, wow, this is great, man. I'm making money. I remember my first contract was 25, 35, 45, 55. And when I was making over $50,000, I was going, man, I might never have to work another day in my life. Little did I know, obviously, but, so naive. But so the short answer to your question, yeah, these guys could do it. I mean, I don't think you could do what they do today and then go back and do what we did. That would be very, very difficult for them.
You mentioned great experiences, Tunch, and our sponsor, Gameday Tailgate Experience, is going to provide one for Steelers Nation. We want you to unite before the Pittsburgh Steelers' big Sunday Night Football rematch against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which kicks off on November 18th. Join Steel City Underground and other Steelers fans traveling to Florida at Gameday Tailgate Experience's gigantic tailgate party. You can leave your grills and your tables at home, and all you need is your terrible towel, as a 5-hour tailgate party begins at 3:30 p.m. This 5-hour pregame tailgate includes unlimited food and a 5-hour open bar. Whoa. There will be TVs so you can watch pregame football coverage, live music and entertainment, family-friendly tailgating games, and amenities. We will also be auctioning off select Jaguars and Steelers memorabilia that you could end up taking home. Several celebrities, including legends from both teams, will make guest appearances as well, and it's the perfect venue to gear up before watching the Steelers avenge their early playoff exit. So for SEU listeners, you can also save 20% off tickets when using the promo code SteelCity during checkout. Just visit us at www.steelcityunderground.com/Jaguars Tailgate for more details. Now, Tunch, to get back to the book, Another chapter that you have is about the offensive line. You call it a band of brothers, and a lot of times, especially a few years back with the Steelers, they considered themselves a band of brothers as a team. But I played offensive line in high school and college, and there's another SCU contributor, Zach Meckler, who also played offensive line in high school and college. And when you talk about the line, you talk about how it's a unique unit unto itself, and you guys do kind of everything together. Do you think that's still the case? And what was that like for you, and how did that foster, what you guys did as a unit?
Well, what I always say that offensive linemen are the tightest unit on any NFL team. And, one of the things I do is I go to different NFL teams to teach them how to pass block, to teach them how to punch. And I see it in everywhere I go. They are very close. And we used to go hunting together, fishing together. Well, the statute of limitations is up, so I can confess this. We used to go ride three-wheelers and dirt bikes together on our days off, I was thinking about that. And everyone, when Ben got in that motorcycle accident, mm-hmm. and people were calling our show and saying, how could he do that? And I was going, well, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones. And I was telling you, every Monday, our day off, we would go riding because we all had three-wheelers, four-wheelers, or dirt bikes, and we'd all switch. Like I'd ride Gary Dunn's dirt bike. I remember I went down from the pipeline in Bridgeville to get some gas, and he said, "Remember, these are knobby tires. Don't accelerate in the middle of a curve." So I'm flying up the hill on Washington Pike Road, and I'm coming to a bend, and I gun it, and all of a sudden the rear wheel almost goes out from under me. I go, okay, I remember that coaching tip. You know what I mean? So we were, we did that on our days off, and we used to go up to Tom Beasley's farm on opening day of deer season, and I go deer hunting, and a bunch of us went down to Gary Dunn's down in the Keys on a fishing trip. We used to call it the Irk McDocken fishing tournament, and Irk McDocken is obviously a fictitious name. But we just hung out together. And I always say that, the offensive linemen are the tightest group because they're the most nervous on game day. Because, if you give up a sack or get called for holding, everybody and their brother knows about it. And so there's no place to hide. So I always said that there was more. I mean, if you look in the locker room, like on game day, Bradshaw and Swanee and Stallworth, they're like joking around. You try to talk to Webby, he's serious. You talk to Boss Brown, serious. Wolf, serious. Me, serious. We're all going over our plays over and over and over again because, I don't know what genius decided to mic referees, but, holding, number 62, your neighbor goes, yeah, hey, Touch, I saw you get called for holding on Sunday. Tough break, man. Got that touchdown call back. And, so I think that's why we are closer. And, on Saturday nights on the road, we would all go out to eat together, just hang together.
Yeah, it was like that way for me in high school and college as well, and I think it's unique to that group of individuals. It felt like that anyway, and you certainly make it
right.
it feel that way. And there really are so many great stories in this book, and we could talk for the next 2 days about it. It feels like, but so I want to highlight one because it just made me laugh, and it because you did something which I thought was really clever in that you brought in a different perspective on the same story you were telling by adding these sections from Craig Wolfley, Wolf's words.
Yeah.
And the one go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Wolf is a great storyteller, and Wolf remembers details sometimes a little bit more than I do, experiences that we had, and so that's why I told Scotty, I go, you got to have Wolf. When we were together at this time, have Wolf give his perspective of what happened. So yeah.
Oh, and it's fantastic. The one story that stood out initially to me was you're playing in a preseason game in Cleveland, and you're
Right.
playing against Ron Simmons, and you're not feeling, let's say, completely well.
Right.
And so you describe that in one way, and Wolf kind of describes it in a slightly different way. Can you tell that story real quick?
Well, yeah. So we're playing, and I was having stomach issues throughout camp. I would throw up once a day, and I remember the docs diagnosed it as projectile vomiting. I go, yeah. Well, what else could it be? It's coming out. It's coming out. Well, we're playing Cleveland in the preseason, and my stomach started messing up, and I was on the line of scrimmage, and I was throwing up during the cadence as I snapped the ball. Now, Wolf remembers that more vividly because I don't. All I know is when you're throwing up, you're not taking into account if you're hitting somebody or and so he saw it from a different standpoint when that I threw up in Ron Simmons' face, and I knew I threw up in his direction, and then one of the things that he doesn't recount that I do is in the huddle I threw up on I think I threw up on his shoes or something because I was in the huddle throwing up, and I was but it was Wolf tells that story great because he remembers it more vividly than I do. When you're sick, you're not remembering the details. All you're knowing is, oh man, so horrible. And so, Wolf does a great job of recounting that story in the book.
And there's several different stories like that. It's really a different way to tell the same story that is just, I thought was really kind of, I don't want to say riveting is necessarily the right word, but that's kind of what it was. It really kept your attention and kept your focus. And as you said, he's got a different way of, Wolf has verbiage.
Yeah. Wolf is very creative. He is a great storyteller. He's always been that way. That's what, that's what I really enjoy about him. And all those stories, we were together. I mean, we were together so much. We've been together for 40 years almost, together, all the time. We played together, we were broadcasting together, we do a radio show together. So, we do have just a very special friendship. He's my best bud, and, for all these years. And so I told Scott, I go, let's put Wolf in the book and let him tell this story. Cause whenever I told a story, I said, Wolf's got a different perspective on this. Let him tell that. And so, I thought it worked out really well.
So you made the transition after your career into broadcasting, and you talk about in the book how you worked on the road with NBC as, I guess, a color guy, and it required a lot of travel, and you weren't loving it because you missed stuff at home. So then you came back and you took the third person in the booth spot with Myron Cope and Bill Hillgrove. And Myron Cope is, of course, a very beloved individual in Steelers lore and Steelers history. And in my view, he's a guy that fans just want to know more about. So what was your experience like working with Myron and making that kind of transition from being a player to a broadcaster?
Well, when I got into broadcasting, actually the first bit of advice, and I don't know if this is in the book or not, I got from Bob Trumpy. And he just said, Tunch, take the listeners where they can't go. Take them into the locker room, take them on the bench, take them into the huddle, take them on the field. And I thought that was a great bit of advice. And the second great bit of advice I had was from Matt Millen, who was working at Fox at the time. So Matt's an old buddy of mine, and I went, spent time with him. He said, Tunch, remember, watch all the film you can, because everyone's going to give you opinions. Trust your own eyes better than someone else's eyes. And I thought that was a great bit of advice. And what I learned from Myron was don't make it too complicated, Tunch. Don't get too complicated in the X's and E's. And he was just great working with it. And because I lived in Upper St. Clair and he lived in Upper St. Clair, and I'd pick him up on the way to games, and we'd have, I think I'd always pick him up, because obviously Myron liked to have his toddies after the game, and that way he wouldn't have to drive. And Myron was the great. I remember the first time I picked him up. It was the first game we did together, and it was the Hall of Fame game, and it was against the New Orleans Saints. And so I picked him up, and he said, "Dear Tunch, can I smoke in your car?" And I said, "Sure." Myron, my dad was a smoker. I got no problems with cigarette smoke, and so he was already, because if you told Myron don't smoke, he'd call you a health Nazi, and so we were driving to the Hall of Fame game, and I knew that there was some clashing between Merrill and Myron because of the way that they told Myron that Merrill was going to be in the booth with him, and then the other part was Merrill felt like he didn't get a chance to speak much on the broadcast. So I was thinking, okay, I'll just ease my way into this. But and the first thing he said to me goes, during the broadcast, Bill will describe the play. I will give my opinion on what happened, and then if I want you to speak, I will ask you. So I go, okay, this is going to be a long time till I get into this game. Well, the opening play, Myron, Deuce McAllister gets tackled by Levon, and he goes, and that was a lovely tackle by the dear Levon. Do you not think, Tunch? And I just froze. Do I not think? Do I think? Do I not think? Do I not think? I go, what do you say is lovely for, Myron? This is football. And that was it. We just had so much fun together, and he was Myron was the best. He was funny, and he was fun, and walking around with him was like walking around with a rock star.
Yeah.
Women would come over and kiss the top of his head, and men would come by and they would do a Myron imitation of Myron. That's what cracked me up when people would talk like Myron to Myron. I'd start laughing. I just thought that was cool. And he was, he was just very gracious, and he talked to everybody, and it was great to work with.
Yeah. Okay. So I've just got a couple more questions, and I want to talk about the current team. They had a bit of a rocky start this season, but the last couple of games they seemed to start to pull things together. And the offensive side of the ball, they had some issues, especially early on, where the initial drives were all seemed to be stalling out, and we weren't making consistent lengthy drives. We had a lot of 3 and outs initially. What do you look at that, and what do you think has helped them turn the corner and start to be more effective?
Well, Brian, the reason I think it's not that I think that they're finally being effective. They're just playing themselves into shape. Look, they don't play in the camp is so easy, and preseason is they play so little. And I get it. There's this paranoia of injuries, and I understand that. But in our day, we would play, a quarter to a half the first 2 preseason games, at least a half the third preseason, and the fourth preseason game we played 3 quarters. Sometimes I remember one time we were playing the Giants, and we played the first half, and the starters were out midway, almost into the beginning of the fourth quarter. At the end of the third quarter, our offensive line coach, Raleigh Dodge, comes to me, Webby, and Wolf, and he says, "You're going back in." And we go, "What?" "Yeah." He goes, "Chuck wants to win this game." and it was an era. So, we were, closer to firing on all cylinders come week 1 today. I mean, everyone's going, "What's wrong with Ben?" And maybe, well, they didn't play together. They didn't practice together. They didn't have any time together. Now, they're starting to round into shape, and they're connecting better, obviously, and the whole offense looks better because the preseason is the preseason today, and it's not what it was. And so I think what we're seeing is them finally getting on the same page and getting into a rhythm.
Yeah, thank you, because I didn't want to lead you into that answer. I actually have a question about that because it's something I've been saying all along is when you don't play in the preseason, how can you expect to be in sync and completely and fully ready to go when the first game starts? And one of the big mantras that we've used here when we talk to, or answer comments on social media and whatnot is just saying, look, just relax. They got to get it. They got to get it worked together, and this is what this is. I'm glad to hear you have that same thought.
Brian, we've been lamenting over that the whole training camp. I mean, Wolf and I sound like a couple of old curmudgeons. Oh, aren't they? They don't hit. They don't do anything. But it's the truth. You know what I mean? And I understand it. It's not unique to the Steelers. Everybody's like that. And so that's why football, some teams are better early. They gel quicker. But you're seeing the Steelers, and because of the injuries and because AB didn't practice, and that's so unusual.
Yeah.
That's what you have. So, they're just, I'm really encouraged with the rest of the season based on what I saw on both sides of the ball last Sunday versus Cincinnati.
Yep. So you talk about the rest of the season. They've got the bye week this week. Then they've got 2 more AFC North games, Cleveland and Baltimore, which we have been saying this 4-game stretch, the second quarter of the season, so to speak, is really going to, in some ways, make or break the team because of the amount of AFC North games in this, in this stretch of games. But they've started out well. Where do you you said you're encouraged. Do you still think this is a Super Bowl contending team? Do you think they're going to come back and take control of the division again? Or is this division more competitive than we thought it was going to be?
I think it is more competitive than we thought it would be. But comparing, if you compare, you look at Flacco, he's throwing for 1,700 yards, 1,788. And, Ben's throwing for over 2,000 yards. Dalton, 1,600 yards. I'm not worried about Cleveland. I think when you have Ben, you're always in it, and based on injuries and how things play out, if you do the comparison player by player, position by position, against the Bengals, against the Ravens, against the Browns, the Steelers, to me, come out ahead in every situation. So I would say that you are correct in saying, yeah, it is more competitive, but I don't look at, these other teams as having the weapons. I mean, no one has the weapons the Steelers have. The Ravens probably have the best defense and the best pass rushers. The Steelers are getting better defensively, I think, and I think the offense is getting better. And I think that you don't want to be playing your best football the first 4 weeks of the season.
Right.
You want to start hitting your stride mid-season and then get really hot down the stretch. And the Steelers historically do just that.
Yep, absolutely. So last thing, and you had to know I was going to bring this up before we got off. Lev Bell. So it's, there are 2 sides to every story, obviously, and Steelers Nation seems to have vilified Lev, and I don't think he's done himself any favors on social media. But when he does come back, if he does come back soon, how do you see that dynamic working in the locker room?
You know what? The guys are going to let bygones be bygones because he is a good, when he's here, he's a good teammate. He's not a cancer in the locker room. Everybody likes him. He's a really good guy. I think he's getting bad advice from his agent. I don't think, if you want, it's one thing to say, hey, we want to save him, but that sounds so self-absorbed, so self-centered, so selfish, that he doesn't sound like a good teammate. And if I were Lev Bell, when the Steelers were struggling early in the season, I would have come, because I would say, oh man, they need me. I got to get there.
Right.
So he's coming. You know what? I don't know when he's coming, but the guys will welcome him back with open arms. And the first big play that he breaks off, you're going to forget about.
Absolutely.
This other stuff. You know what I mean? Because it's the fact that you got to be asking a question. Can he help us? Well, yeah, he can. And so if that's the case, you've got to put this behind you and continue. It's not like. I don't agree with what he's done. I don't agree with how he's done it. But he can help this football team. And if he does, then, you let bygones be bygones.
Yeah. Now, since James Conner has really played well, especially the last couple weeks, do you think it becomes more of a committee, or is it going to be once Lev's in shape and ready to go, it's his ball to tote?
I think that you've got to, James Conner is going to be your lead dog, and then you bring in Lev, get him acclimated, get him playing, get him to be back, get back into shape, and then you see, you know what I mean? I mean, if I love James Conner's running style. It's hard, it's physical, he breaks a lot of tackles, but I also think it'd be kind of cool to see both those guys in the game at the same time. I mean, if I'm Randy Fiedner, I'm saying, come on, Lev, get back. I got all this. I got these games. I got these plays. I got these schemes. Come on, I want both you guys in the game at the same time, because that would be a fun thing. If I put my offensive coordinator's mind on, I'd go for split backs. Last year Tennessee, they did a bunch of split backs with their two running backs, and I was watching what Malarkey was doing. His exotic smash mouth, and the Tennessee Titans last year had the most complex running game I have seen in the NFL in the last 20 years. And it was so effective. And I thought to myself, you get two running backs, I'm going split backs. Have a little fun with these guys. And I think, I don't know that Randy Fiedner's thinking that way, but I'd be thinking that way.
Gotcha. So I want to remind everybody, the book is called In the Locker Room. It's available anywhere books are sold, or you can get it at www.triumphbooks.com/In the Locker Room. Tunch, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. Steelers Nation, it's a great book. It really is. It's filled with stories and insight, and quite honestly, you won't be able to put it down because you'll just want to keep hearing what comes up next. Tunch, thanks again for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time.
All right, thanks, brother. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. And that's going to wrap it up for this edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. As always, everybody, it's chaos out there, so be kind.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.